This is chapter number 9 of the book, The End of Islamic World. So,
142 Cultural incest, or a free city without freedom. An involuntary experience with a closed society in the middle of Europe made the dilemma of the Islamic world clear to me. No, it wasn't an immigrant enclave in Berlin or Paris, but a European parallel society called Freetown Christiania in Copenhagen. I was in the Danish capital in the summer of 2009 because my wife, who is half Danish, was working at the university there. The journalist Henrik M. Border visited me there to interview me for Der Spiegel about my latest book. The interview lasted several days. During a break, we went for a walk in the port city and once ended up at Christiania, a liberated zone occupied by hippies in 1971 on a former military site in the Christianshavn district. Since then, the enclave has been a kind of oasis for left-wing dropouts who wanted to offer an alternative to the neoliberal capitalism and consumer terror of Western societies. Today, between 7 and 1100 people live there, and they see Christiania as an independent city with its own laws, flag, and even currency. 143. My wife was born in Copenhagen but had never been to Christiania and knew little about this part of the city. She only said that many Danes consider the colony a cult, while many avoid this neighborhood and advocate for its abolition. We entered Christiania through the main entrance and went straight to the infamous Pusher Street, the heart of the colony. Signs prohibiting photography were everywhere. In the Freetown, which sees itself as the last remaining oasis of true freedom and justice, nothing is forbidden except pulling dogs on their leashes or running fast on Pusher Street. And there's a reason for that. Pusher Street is Denmark's largest street drug market, a multi-million-dollar business. But only soft drugs like hashish and marijuana are for sale there, the Christianites like to emphasize again and again. Anyone caught selling or consuming hard drugs is banished from the city, a teacher named Bente, who has lived in Christiania since 1984, later told me. I also learned from her that the Danish police are not allowed to interfere in Christiania. Bente explained that the colony is governed by grassroots democracy. When conflicts arise, all adult men and women meet and discuss the matter until everyone, without exception, reaches a common decision. A process that can take weeks or months. Residents. 144. Found to have committed serious offenses are banished from the city either permanently or for a certain period of time. Apparently, there is no personal property in Christiania, nor are there salaries. Everyone works into a communal fund that is divided fairly among all residents. When I asked whether this also applied to the drug dealers on Pusher Street, Bente swallowed and didn't give me a clear answer. It is quite obvious that the majority of the unemployed residents are paid in kind by the dealers for their silence. I did not sense any freedom in Christiania. The dazed, skeptical glances of the Christianites, directed at every stranger who enters the colony, and the prohibition signs gave me more the atmosphere of a Big Brother container on drugs. Broder is a full-blooded journalist and, from the moment we entered the city, he smelled the possibility of an exciting report. He was not impressed by the prohibition signs and started taking pictures. Several times he was warned by passers-by or guards positioned on small lookout towers at the intersection with Pusher Street that taking photographs could end badly for him. But somehow he did not take this warning seriously. It came from completely drunk Christianites. This was his biggest mistake and he had to pay for it. Suddenly, a tall, muscular young dealer appeared and, at first politely, asked Broder 145 to show him the pictures he was taking. Broder refused and hid the camera behind his back. This confirmed the dealer's suspicion that Broder had photographed him while he was dealing. He pulled at Broder and tried to take the camera away by force. "You idiot, give him the camera, or do you want to die?" shouted some Christiania, who initially seemed unconcerned. As Broder's rebellion continued, several young men rushed to the dealer's aid and threw Broder to the ground. My wife and I tried to free him from their grasp, but were unsuccessful. While Broder was lying on the ground, he stubbornly and doggedly defended his camera, which he had hidden in his trouser pocket, while the dealers beat him mercilessly. I saw before me a bitter battle between two radical conceptions of freedom, which Broder lost brilliantly. In the end, the young dealers had no choice but to rip open his trousers and take his camera away. Without looking at the pictures, one of them immediately threw them into a burning garbage can. Broder's fighting spirit, however, did not seem to have been broken. He stood up, ran to the garbage can and tried to pull his chestnut out of the fire. In vain, because it was already smoldering. One could say he had burned his fingers on freedom. With an injured hand and ripped trousers. 146. He left Freetown with us, followed by aggressive cries of "idiot." He went with us to the first police station, 4 kilometers outside of Christiania, and asked the officer to go with him to Freetown to identify those who had attacked him and stolen his camera. The officers made it clear to him that this was not possible because they needed 50 armed men to operate in Christiania, and they only did that when it came to murders. Bomb explosions often occurred in the cafes of Christiania and people were often shot in the streets there. Turf wars and extortion had forced the state to act, but not much had come of it. A few years ago, the security forces attempted to disband the colony with a large police presence following a court ruling, but they were thwarted by the resistance of the rioting Christianites. Not even a few officers can go there today in plain clothes, because the dealers have hung up photos of all Copenhagen police officers, making them instantly recognizable. We left the police station without success. Suddenly, Broder stopped and said, smiling, "Let's have some ice cream." My wife asked him, "Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine. I already did my exercises this afternoon, and now I feel fit." This incident preoccupied me for a long time, and I asked myself why a community that stood up in the 147 name of justice and freedom behaved so uptight and paranoid. The only answer that came to me was that isolation and a sense of moral superiority over the outside world lead to a kind of cultural incest. The more outside influences increase, the more foreign eyes are turned on the reservation, the more insecure the idealists within become. The more strongly the artificial cohesion and solidarity among the members of the community of shared destiny becomes expressed. Today, most Christianites live off the expense of the neoliberal, capitalist state, which they want to abolish. Electricity, the internet, and all the amenities of modern society have long been part of this independent utopia. The dropouts have not become world changers, but rather mindless individuals at the mercy of drug-induced intoxication, fighting for their very survival. The vanguard of the world revolution has become nothing more than involuntary informants for drug dealers. Many parts of the Islamic world are caught in precisely this dilemma. All that remains of the once thriving, inquisitive culture that emerged as a social revolution and sought to change the world are paranoid children of incest who have lost the inner principle of the community and are now concerned only with self-preservation. In the intoxication of 148. Uncomprehending faith and unjustified self-glorification, they offer no alternative to the outside world, but rather become a burden to it. Every attempt to dismantle these outdated structures is met with violence and rigidity. Resistance has become an end in itself, because creativity and energy are insufficient for anything else. The beginning of a community's disintegration lies in its founding idea and the boundaries it establishes with the outside world. Its definition and redefinition of the mission it fulfills for the world are also crucial. Isolation leads to strict codes that culminate in self-aggression. A culture consumes itself from within before venting violence externally. Uncomprehending, it insists on the goodness of its self-imposed mission and marches incorrigibly to its own grave. On its way there, however, it drags many uninvolved people along with it. I wanted a second opinion about Christiania and my wife and I met with the teacher Benta, who was very apologetic and dismissed everything negative about Christiania as a conspiracy by the neoliberal media. She tried to sell us the enclave as a paradise of solidarity and peaceful coexistence. She wanted to hear nothing about the drug problems and violence in the colony. She reminded 149 me of my first months in Germany, when I tried to describe Islamic culture as flawless and stubbornly ignored all the flaws that I knew all too well. The insecurity that my encounter with Germany triggered in me at that time caused me to reduce my culture to the beautiful weather, the good food, and the friendly people. This was nothing more than a reversal of the characteristics that I suspected or thought I perceived in the Germans. Karsten's assessment of Christiania was much more sober. A native of Hamburg, he has lived in the Free City since 1979, built his own house right on the waterfront, and is now responsible for the Christiania Building Commission. He also heads the local shopping center. We were supposed to meet there. We were able to contact Karsten online and arrange an appointment with him. We entered Christiania through the other entrance, bypassing Pusher Street. We took the ferry and entered the colony via the waterfront. This time, everything looked idyllic and peaceful. Ecologically built houses, deserted streets, and dogs running free. I felt like I was in my village in Egypt 30 years ago. The shopping center, however, turned out to be a small kiosk, barely recognizable from the outside. The looks of the German dropout Karsten, as well as those of his customers, as we entered the store. 150. Were skeptical. And yet, it wasn't long before he invited us to his home, cooked a generous meal, and even offered us marijuana from his Sham-grown crop. He told us that the main problem of Christiania's residents was that many of them lived in the past and didn't want to understand that times were changing. He was fighting to open the city to tourists and to sell each visitor a Christiania coin worth 50 kroner, the equivalent of €8, as an entrance fee, which could be used to buy products made in Christiania. He was met with resistance to this idea, because it would imply capitalism. Tourists would come anyway, but they wouldn't profit from it. When I asked him why they rejected the Danish government's offer of normalization, he said, "Normalization for the neoliberal government means controlling us and connecting the 34 hectares that make up Christiania to the monetary system. And we would never allow that." Despite the messianic language, Karsten doesn't overestimate the role of his community. "We're just a social experiment, an idea that could make people out there think about their way of life." Karsten believes the reason the enclave has lasted so long and is met with hostility is that some Danes don't want the Christianites as their neighbors in the city and therefore support them, so they stay in the zoo. Others envy them. 151 Because they live stress-free in Copenhagen's most beautiful corner and therefore want to dissolve the city. When I asked him about Pusher Street, he was open. He said he used to be a dealer himself, but had quit because he didn't want to die from a bullet. When asked why a free city forbids photography, he said, "We're being pressured from outside to behave like this. We want to be left alone, but the police can use such photos against us." But Henrik Broder also exercised his freedom when he took photos in Pusher Street. "Why did they beat him up?" I asked. "Oh yeah, that idiot from Der Spiegel. It's his own fault. Freedom doesn't mean playing tennis on the highway. Besides, even if you want to photograph a bush in Africa and someone there tells you no, you have to accept it," he said, laughing. When asked why the Christianites react suspiciously to the looks of strangers, he says, "The visitors stare at us monkeys and do not know that the monkeys are staring at them too." Despite his sobriety, Karsten is very convinced of his community's concept and wishes that all of Denmark would become like Christiania. The world would be more peaceful and cleaner. This Pax Christiania reminds me of the earlier 152 Islamic understanding of peace. Back then, the world was divided into a house of war and a house of Islam. Peace could only prevail if Islamization took hold. But Christiania differs from the Islamic idea in one key respect, namely in its treatment of the new generation. When I asked Karsten whether he had any children and whether they would also live in Christiania, he told me that he had a daughter who lived outside Christiania. She had moved out for the same reason that had prompted her father to move in. She didn't want to live like her parents. But she is still a Christian at heart, like many Danes. She comes and brings a breath of fresh air and soon leaves again, he concluded, looking satisfied, as if he had just reinvented the meaning of this enclave. And this is where I see Islam's greatest deficit, namely its attitude towards individuality and personal development. The insistence on norms and ways of life that are no longer appropriate in the 21st century makes it difficult for many Muslims to integrate as a minority in a secular society. From an Islamic perspective, the fact that everyone can do whatever they want threatens the community. I consider gender apartheid and the 153 disempowerment of women to be the greatest sin. Modern civilization is based precisely on the happiness of the individual being the prerequisite for the functioning of the community. But to see this only as a danger encourages isolation. The fact that the self-determined life of children, especially daughters, is seen as a threat rather than an opportunity robs society of enormous resources that it urgently needs in these difficult times. The fact that the windows of a house are not seen as openings through which fresh air can enter, but rather as the weak point through which one's own children can escape and intruders can sneak in, hinders every form of progress. Thus, the outside world remains a world of the enemy, and every gesture emanating from it is interpreted as hostile. Here, beyond the philosophical formula, it can be asserted without any ifs and buts that European civilization is significantly freer than Muslim civilization. Even if the system in Europe appropriates individuals, it at least offers them the framework for personal development and allows them the opportunity to leave the system at any time. 150